My brother Jason openly mocked me, calling me Dad's live-in servant at the private wake we held in my father's Chicago penthouse, but his entitled, smug expression immediately collapsed into panicked tears when the estate attorney announced the $9.8 million fortune was now entirely mine. The air in the penthouse's executive lounge, overlooking the glittering expanse of Lake Michigan, felt dangerously pressurized. We were standing among the remnants of an expensive catering service, unopened bottles of Napa Cabernet and forgotten plates of gourmet sliders, but the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. My father, Robert Lane, a titan of Midwestern logistics, had passed 3 days earlier, and his death had merely intensified the decades of bad blood that ran through the Lane family. It was just Mom, Diana, Jason, his fiancée Chelsea, and me, Victoria, gathered for the reading of the will. I was tired, bone-weary from 4 years of acting as Dad's primary caregiver and managing his complex, failing health, but the fatigue was nothing compared to the cold, focused clarity that had settled over me. "Seriously, Vicky, look at you," Jason drawled, gesturing dismissively toward my simple black dress. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, looking more like the heir than I ever would. He was speaking loudly enough for Mr. Sterling, the family's old guard attorney, to hear from the next room. "You're still organizing. Can't you let the help handle the clearing of the used wine glasses? You've been managing the household staff for so long. I think you forgot you're supposed to be a beneficiary, not the head housekeeper." My mother, Diana, a woman whose entire identity revolved around the Gold Coast social calendar, offered a delicate, poisonous smile. "He has a point, dear. It's a habit now. Honestly, we are all very grateful you put your little CPA career on hold to manage the domestic situation. You certainly saved us the hassle, didn't you, Jason? You know how messy it all is, dealing with geriatric care." Jason chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that scratched against my carefully constructed calm. "Messy? No, Mom. It was tedious. Vicky was perfect for the role. Reliable, invisible, and she always paid attention to the details like a good assistant. We can't have the future CEO of Lane Global Logistics worried about Dad's pill schedule, can we? I have real money to focus on, scaling the business." He clapped me condescendingly on the shoulder, the gesture stinging more than his words. "So, thanks, sis. Your servitude has been officially retired. Now, let's get this probate moving so I can get back to building the empire you were too nervous to try and tackle." The injustice was so blatant, so cruel, that it took my breath away. Not in sorrow, but in focused, ice-cold rage. They didn't just overlook my sacrifice. They actively minimized and weaponized it, painting my 4 years of professional-level care and financial oversight as the mere acts of a low-grade domestic worker. They truly believed I had accepted the role of caregiver because I was intellectually incapable of achieving Jason's level of vision in the corporate world, when in reality I had shelved a high-paying forensic accounting partnership track in Chicago to ensure my father wasn't neglected and exploited by the very people now congratulating themselves. For 4 years, I was the sole barrier between them and Dad's dwindling lucidity, and they saw me as the help. I had anticipated the greed, but the sheer, casual cruelty of Jason's mocking was a deeper wound. That moment changed everything, confirming that my calculated revenge was not just necessary, but morally required. I pulled away from Jason's touch, my expression unreadable. I walked over to the mahogany side table, where Mr. Sterling had briefly rested his briefcase before joining us. I reached into my bag. Not the medical supply bag I carried for Dad, but my own worn leather briefcase, and pulled out a pristine silver USB drive. It was engraved subtly with the logo of my husband's law firm, Reed and Associates, a top M&A and litigation powerhouse based downtown. I slid it across the table toward Mr. Sterling. Before Mr. Sterling reads the final will, there is one detail Jason might want to review, related to the primary assets of Lane Global Logistics, I said, my voice cutting through the smug silence, professional and sharp, like glass. I looked directly at Jason, whose confident posture was starting to buckle. It concerns the restructuring of the $9.8 million portfolio, the one you've been bragging about inheriting for the last hour. Jason frowned, the first hint of genuine confusion and fear clouding his features. What restructuring? What are you talking about, Vicky? That's not relevant to the will. Everything is 50-50ths, always has been. I ignored his question and addressed the attorney. Mr. Sterling, you are aware of the court-appointed conservatorship I held, which made me the sole fiduciary of the estate's liquid and business assets for the last 48 months? Mr. Sterling nodded gravely. Excellent. And you are also aware that my husband, Marcus Reed, the head of litigation at Reed & Associates, insisted on flawless legal documentation for every single one of my 16-hour days, including my professional CPA valuation of those hours? I paused, letting the name Marcus Reed, a recognized powerhouse in Chicago legal circles, hit them like a physical blow. I logged every pill, every specialist appointment, and every single financial decision. And as Mr. Sterling will confirm, my father and I put a highly specific legally ironclad elder care annuity, ECA, in place 3 years ago, funded by the exact $9.8 million you're hoping to split. He thought he'd won the game, waiting for Dad to pass so he could inherit the whole kit and caboodle. But I was playing chess while he was playing checkers. That USB contains the complete court-certified documentation proving the $9.8 million compensation was earned. You should have checked the accounting, Jason, before you decided to throw shade at the person keeping your entire legacy solvent and out of probate court. The look on his face, that flicker of pure, devastating doubt, told me the game had just begun, and he had already lost the opening move. My entire life, I had been the sensible shadow to Jason's blinding, entitled light. We grew up in an affluent suburb near Dallas, Texas, where my father, Robert, built his logistics empire from scratch. Dad was a self-made man who somehow, tragically, became convinced that only his charismatic, careless son was worthy of inheriting his ambition. Jason was the risk-taker, the flashy businessman, always chasing the next big thing. I was the risk mitigator, the one who cleaned up the financial messes. Jason was the visionary. I was the boring accountant. The favoritism was not subtle. It was systemic and cruel, eroding my self-worth one comment at a time. When I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with honors and my CPA license, securing a job at a prestigious New York forensic auditing firm, Dad bought me a sensible, used sedan. When Jason dropped out of community college for the third time to pursue a disruptive venture, a bespoke, app-based dog walking service that failed in 8 months, Dad financed his move to Miami, gifting him a brand new Porsche SUV and co-signing a $500,000 office lease. Vicky, your stability is commendable, Mom Diana once said to me over a potluck dinner at Thanksgiving, the holiday that always seemed to bring out the worst in their favoritism, while Jason loudly bragged about his future yacht. But Jason has the passion, the fire. He's the one who will make Robert proud by putting the Lane name on something truly big, something national. You'll always have your reliable spreadsheets, dear, and we appreciate that you're good at keeping the family afloat behind the scenes. The passive aggression was so deeply ingrained in our family culture that it was practically cultural wallpaper. They stole my achievements by constantly minimizing them, turning my competence and dedication into a character flaw, a lack of vision. I moved to Chicago, earned my forensic accounting specialization, and established myself as a ruthless investigator of corporate fraud, often dealing with the kind of entitled executives my brother aspired to be. It was there I met Marcus Reed, a rising star in corporate litigation. Marcus wasn't intimidated by my family's money or my professional intensity. He was a self-made man from humble beginnings who understood power, contracts, and the cold reality of legal protection. He saw the rot in my family immediately and became my emotional anchor and my legal shield, confirming what I already knew. My family's emotional currency was bankrupt, and the only language they understood was the law. The true breaking point arrived 5 years ago. I was on the fast track to partnership at my firm, a career milestone that would have secured my future, when Dad suffered a massive, debilitating stroke that severely impacted his cognitive functions. The doctors were clear. He needed full-time, professional management, round-the-clock nursing supervision, and complex, highly specialized financial oversight. Jason's reaction was immediate and utterly self-serving. "I'm in the middle of launching a major strategic investment, Mom. I can't stop now. Millions are at stake. I'll send money for a good nurse, but I'm hands off." His investment vehicle was, predictably, a glorified hedge fund trading in highly volatile penny stocks that he managed from a leased desk in Dallas. Mom was equally useless, prioritizing her social standing over her husband's health. "I simply cannot handle the sight of a sick room, Victoria. I'm needed at the country club charity board. Who will organize the Black Friday benefit auction? You're the responsible one. It's your duty to take care of your father. You can work remotely, can't you? Your spreadsheets can travel." They leveraged my empathy and my expertise against me, manipulating me into giving up my career. I knew if I didn't step in, they would bleed Dad dry, either through financial neglect or outright fraud. I kissed Marcus goodbye. He was fiercely against the sacrifice, urging me to hire external help, but he understood the moral imperative and moved into the Chicago penthouse. That moment changed everything. It was the day I stopped being a victim of their emotional abuse and started being a calculated professional operative. The first thing I did wasn't to hire a nurse. It was to call Marcus. "They think they've sidelined me into housekeeping. Help me build a legal fortress around Dad and his assets. One that can't be dismantled even after his death. I need proof of my worth." My discovery of Jason's betrayal wasn't dramatic. It was pure, cold, forensic accounting. While going through Dad's disorganized financial files in the study, a room Jason hadn't stepped into since his 21st birthday, I found a chilling digital paper trail. It was a series of wire transfers and hastily executed corporate documents linked to a shell company in Delaware, the kind that forensic accountants like me specialized in unmasking. Jason, recognizing Dad's increasing confusion shortly after the stroke, had convinced him to sign over a large chunk of liquid assets, nearly $1.20 million, ostensibly for a strategic investment in AI logistics, a buzzword he knew Dad couldn't resist. The reality, exposed by the bank metadata, was that Jason had used the entire $1.2 million to pay off personal gambling debts incurred during a disastrous trip to Las Vegas and fund a ludicrously lavish engagement party he was planning with Chelsea, Tiffany-level spending on a Taco Bell income. The transactions were fraudulent, designed to look like a legitimate, arm's-length business expense from a fictional company. "This isn't just entitlement, Vicky. It's statutory elder abuse and corporate financial fraud," Marcus confirmed over a secured line from his corner office after I'd sent him the initial findings. "This is a felony, not a family squabble. We need to make it impossible for them to touch the principal, and we need to use your service, your actual, professional service, as the irrefutable justification for the transfer. It has to be airtight under Illinois probate law." The revenge plan, the elder care annuity, ECA, and the financial fortress. My plan, developed with Marcus, was brilliant in its legality and its ability to weaponize my own sacrifice. Instead of trying to challenge Dad's pre-stroke will, which would inevitably lead to Jason contesting based on Dad's compromised mental state and create a messy, public trial, we would strategically remove the majority of the assets entirely from the probate estate. The conservatorship and fiduciary duty. First, I filed for and was swiftly granted legal conservatorship over my father's person and estate. This was the most critical step. It legally designated me as the sole fiduciary, overriding any previous power of attorney Jason might have manipulated and locking down all accounts against unauthorized access. The professional valuation and documentation, this was my sweet spot. For 4 years, I meticulously logged every hour I dedicated to Dad and the estate. I didn't just track nursing care, I tracked the time spent restructuring the logistics firm's debt, managing the investment portfolio, consulting with specialists, and filing complex tax returns. Marcus, using his firm's resources, performed a rigorous, court-ready valuation of my 4 years of service, factoring in my New York CPA salary, my forensic specialization, and the round-the-clock nursing care I provided. The minimum conservative value was calculated at $2.1 million, but the total number of documented hours provided the legal leverage we needed for the full transfer. The ECA execution. We created the Lane Family Irrevocable Elder Care Annuity, ECA, a complex non-probate financial instrument. Dad, in one of his last periods of full cognitive clarity, certified by 3 independent neurologists, thanks to Marcus, was presented with the evidence of Jason's theft and my meticulous professional care. He signed documents legally transferring $9.8 million of his core business and investment assets into the ECA. The terms were explicit. The ECA was established as compensation for future and past services rendered by Victoria Lane, the sole caregiver and financial steward, effectively prepaying my lifetime work. Upon the death of the annuitant, Dad, the funds would immediately transfer to the beneficiary, me, outside the purview of the will. The ECA was structured perfectly to be compensation for services rendered, making it incredibly difficult to challenge, as I had the documentation to prove every single hour of work. I was not inheriting, I was getting paid, retroactively and preemptively, for a full-time, highly skilled job. The will tweak. After the ECA was funded, the only assets remaining in Dad's probate estate were the penthouse, some personal effects, and about $200,000 in miscellaneous savings. Dad signed a final codicil stipulating that any debts owed to him by a beneficiary must be deducted from their share. This $200,000 was set to be split 50/50ths. Jason's $1.2 million fraud was now a debt to the estate, technically bankrupting his entire inheritance before the will was even read. Marcus handled the documentation with military precision, filing it all through the proper channels and the IRS. The years that followed were a cold war fought on a balance sheet. I maintained my quiet, obedient composure, diligently managing Dad's care and the family's books, all while Jason and Mom continued their entitlement theater. Jason would fly in for Thanksgiving, barely spend 10 minutes with Dad, and then spend the evening complaining about the small portion of apple pie I had left him after catering to Dad's dietary restrictions, all while talking loudly about his imminent but perpetually delayed IPO. "You're still here, Vicky? Still playing nursemaid? Don't you miss the real world of finance?" he'd ask over the turkey carving. "I'm managing $9.8 million in legally protected assets, Jason, ensuring they remain solvent against external pressures," I'd reply flatly, my eyes conveying a warning. "That feels pretty real to me. Are those new penny stocks of yours still trading at a fraction of a cent?" The tension reached a boiling point 3 months before Dad's death, during an emergency meeting at a high-end steakhouse in downtown Chicago. Jason was in a full panic because his latest venture was collapsing, and he desperately needed Dad to co-sign a massive loan, a loan I knew the fully protected estate could not legally afford to back. "Listen, Vicky, you have to convince Dad to sign these papers," Jason pleaded, leaning over the white tablecloth, his expensive suit looking strained. The entitlement was replaced with raw desperation. "It's critical for the Q3 funding. I just need $5 million in collateral. You're the one here every day. You have the power to influence him." "I do have the power, Jason," I confirmed, taking a deliberate, slow sip of my water. "And as the court-appointed conservator and fiduciary, my legal duty is solely to Dad's financial health, not your reckless, risky business ventures." The answer is no. Absolutely not. The estate is protected against your self-sabotage. "You self-righteous little... You're just jealous of my ambition," he spat, his voice rising, drawing attention from the neighboring table celebrating a corporate open-plan office success. You hid here, wiping his chin, avoiding the market pressures, while I was out there swinging for the fences. When the money comes, I promise you, I'm going to make you regret your pathetic little spreadsheet life. I'll sell the company and send you a thank you note on a retirement home pamphlet. I didn't raise my voice. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a printout of the Delaware Shell Corporation's financial statement and the corresponding internal communication, and slid it to him. Did you declare that $1.2 million transfer you took 4 years ago to the IRS as a personal income distribution, Jason? Or did you try to claim it as a business expense write-off for Lane Global Logistics, a company that never existed outside of a post office box, effectively committing tax fraud? His face went white. The color drained so fast he looked physically ill, like a child who realized he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Only the stakes were millions of dollars and a federal investigation. He stammered, his eyes darting around the room. What are you talking about? That was Dad's money. A loan, a handshake deal. It was fraud, Jason, and you know it, I whispered, leaning in, ensuring only he could hear the sound of his world crashing down. Dad was not cognitively capable of signing off on a $1.2 million investment in AI logistics. I have the certified medical records. I have the forensic accounting trail that proves the money was immediately used to cover gambling debts and personal expenses. And I have Marcus Reed, the best M&A litigator in the city, ready to drop this evidence with the SEC and the IRS the second you try to contest the will. Or, more importantly, the elder care annuity. You want to fight for your inheritance? Go ahead. But understand that the fight won't be about the money. It will be about criminal tax evasion. You are not fighting me, Jason. You are fighting the U.S. government, and the IRS doesn't mess around. I stood up, leaving the printout on the table. You are a debtor to the estate, liable for $1.2 million. Get your affairs in order. I left him sitting there, alone with the terrifying knowledge that the dependable, quiet sister he had mocked was holding a legal and financial time bomb, and he was the only target. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. Finalize the last piece of legal shielding before Dad's predictable decline reached its conclusion. The final confrontation took place precisely 1 week after the funeral, in the sterile, high-tech conference room of Mr. Sterling's law office, high above the Chicago skyline. The glass walls reflected the dramatic, cloudy afternoon, mirroring the tension inside. Jason was visibly shaky, sweating despite the room's air conditioning. He kept shooting venomous glances at me, but the fear in his eyes was palpable. Mom, Diana, maintained her brittle composure, but her expensive handbag shook slightly in her lap. Marcus, my husband and partner in the strategic dismantling, stood silently behind me, a suit of legal armor and a physical manifestation of my power and protection. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and began the reading of the last will and testament of Robert Lane. It was quick and anticlimactic, focused on the residual assets. The penthouse apartment was left to Mom, Diana, but with the specific and binding stipulation that any future sale proceeds be placed into a strictly managed, irrevocable trust for her ongoing care, also overseen by an independent, court-appointed fiduciary, who happened to be a former associate of Marcus's. This was Dad's final, subtle way of ensuring Mom couldn't instantly hand the property equity over to Jason. Then came the bequest to the children, the part Jason had been waiting for. Mr. Sterling read the relevant section. To my children, Jason Lane and Victoria Lane, the remainder of my liquid estate, totaling approximately $200,000, shall be divided equally, subject to any outstanding debts owed to the estate. Jason instantly jumped in, trying to claim his $100,000 and move on. Fine, just transfer it now. Mr. Sterling calmly adjusted his glasses, a look of tired professionalism on his face. As for the $200,000, the estate has performed a final certified audit, as per the final codicil of the will and the conservatorship filings. Mr. Jason Lane has an outstanding, documented, and legally confirmed debt of $1.2 million owed to the estate, stemming from unauthorized asset transfer in 2021. Therefore, his share of the residual estate is fully nullified, and he remains liable to the estate for the remaining $1 million, payable within 90 days. The air left Jason's lungs in a violent rush. He didn't scream. He imploded, the sound a choked primal noise of absolute shock. He slammed his fist on the polished mahogany table, knocking over a crystal glass of water. "This is a lie! It's all a lie! She tricked him. She was his nurse, his caretaker. She used his confusion to steal everything." Tears, genuine, snotty, panicked tears, streamed down his face. Not the tears of a grieving son, but of a ruined, entitled man who had just realized his entire future was gone. I finally spoke, my voice hitting the room with the force of a gavel. It was devoid of any emotion, the ultimate professional delivering a final, crushing verdict. "It wasn't a trick, Jason. It was a contract. A legally binding professional agreement. The $9.8 million wasn't an inheritance. It was compensation for 12,850 hours of documented, highly skilled, uncompensated service, structured as an elder care annuity, executed by me as the court-appointed conservator. Your own lawyers will confirm it is legally impervious to contestation. You had 4 years to offer help, to share the burden, or even to pretend to care. But you chose to mock me and attempt to steal what remained. I preserved the assets, which is why they are now legally mine, structured as a professional fee." Diana, pale and shaking, turned on me, her eyes wet with sudden performative grief. "How could you do this to your own brother, Victoria? To your family? This isn't how the Lanes operate. We don't ruin each other." "The Lanes operate on entitlement, Mom," I retorted, meeting her gaze steadily, my voice flat. "I operate on the Uniform Probate Code and the IRS regulations. You enabled his theft and dismissed my sacrifice. The $9.8 million represents the equity of my time and the value of my forensic expertise. The fact that you and Jason are now facing financial scrutiny and possible legal action from the estate's ongoing liability audit, the one that will expose his $1.2 million tax fraud, is simply a side effect of your own choices. You played the fool, thinking I was the servant, and now you have lost everything." Marcus stepped forward, his presence filling the void left by Jason's breakdown. He addressed Mom and Jason with the cold finality of the law. "Mr. Lane, Mrs. Lane, please understand. Miss Lane has full legal control of the assets as compensation. Any challenge you mount will open your own personal finances to intense scrutiny, especially concerning the tax filings related to that $1.2 million transfer. I strongly advise you to accept the terms and secure counsel to negotiate repayment of the debt to the estate." Jason buried his head in his hands, his sobs echoing in the silence. The golden boy was not just cut out. He was legally, financially, and morally neutralized. He cried not for the father he lost, but for the entitled future he believed he deserved but never earned. I watched him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no anger, only the profound satisfaction of justice served. The fallout was complete and swift. Jason lost his leased office. His extravagant fiancée Chelsea abandoned him immediately upon realizing the $9.8 million had vanished. And he was forced to liquidate his remaining pathetic investments to pay back the initial $1.2 million he owed the estate. He went from being the self-proclaimed future CEO to desperately searching for a low-level sales job in his mid-40s. Diana, reliant on the strictly managed trust and unable to access capital for her lavish social spending, was forced to dramatically downsize her expectations and her social calendar. She had lost her primary financial cushion and, perhaps worse, the favorite son she had poured her entire identity into saving. The public humiliation, played out in whispers through their country club network, was punishment enough for her. I, Victoria Lane, emerged from the wreckage not just financially secure, but profoundly powerful. The $9.8 million compensation was the capital. My experience in crisis management and fraud detection was the engine. I immediately partnered with Marcus and used the seed money to launch Lane Reed Forensic Stewardship, a firm specializing in high net worth estate transparency, litigation support, and elder care financial defense. My story was my most effective pitch. I know exactly where your family is hiding the money, and I know how to stop them, because I did it to my own. I became a sought-after expert in Chicago and New York, regularly lecturing on corporate fiduciary duty and the nuances of the elder care annuity structure I had pioneered. I turned the narrative of servitude into a badge of honor, proof that my meticulous, quiet work was more valuable than Jason's flashy, entitled failures. I often spoke at financial conferences, using the phrase, "Never underestimate the power of the quiet one with a CPA license and a litigation partner." My best friend and former colleague from New York, Linda Chen, a brilliant lawyer in her own right, flew to Chicago 6 months after the settlement to celebrate. We met at a trendy, bustling brunch spot near Lincoln Park, worlds away from the sterile penthouse I had been trapped in. "You really did it, V," Linda said, clinking her mimosa glass against mine. "You took their weapon, your caring nature, and turned it into a legal shield worth 8 figures. That's the ultimate shade." "They forced me to treat my time as a commodity, Linda," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in years. "They treated me like the help, so I billed them like a CEO. I had to redefine my own worth outside of their toxic approval. My value isn't based on their inheritance. It's based on my competence." We spent the afternoon talking business strategy, not family drama, discussing new markets like Silicon Valley, where the young tech fortunes often fell victim to the same old family entitlement. I realized that the true victory wasn't the money, but the freedom and the ability to pursue the career path I had delayed. A year after the will reading, Marcus and I were on a celebratory road trip, driving my sleek new SUV south from Chicago down the iconic, seemingly endless stretch of Route 66 on a clear autumn day. We stopped at a classic roadside diner in rural Missouri for a proper American burger, the kind of unpretentious, real place that felt a million miles away from the Gold Coast. "You never flinched, even when he started crying," Marcus observed, reaching across the booth to hold my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. "I learned a long time ago that their tears were just another form of manipulation, Marcus," I said, a deep, lasting peace settling over me. "I didn't do this for revenge. Not entirely. I did it for justice. I sacrificed 4 years of my prime. Not because I was Dad's servant, but because I was the only honest financial manager he had left. The $9.8 million is the fee I earned, fully documented and justified." "What's next for Lane Reed Forensic Stewardship?" he asked, smiling, already knowing the answer. I looked out the window at the vast American road, the symbol of opportunity and endless possibility stretching before me. We expand. We open a dedicated office in New York City. We take on more complex cases. We protect the vulnerable and bankrupt the entitled. They thought they had me beat, a dependable girl stuck in a spreadsheet and a sick room. But they forgot that the only thing more powerful than money is the truth, meticulously documented and legally presented. I took my shot. And now, I'm not just rebuilding my life. I'm building an empire on the ruins of their toxic entitlement, one balance sheet at a time. I squeezed his hand, ready for the next chapter of the American dream, finally living it entirely on my own terms. The quiet girl who was mocked as the servant had finally gotten the last, most satisfying laugh of all.